Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Thank you so much for clicking on it. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Of course, only do so if you feel this video is deserving of it, but it is very, very much appreciated. It is the best way to help the channel grow. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. I'd love to see you come back. Also, really quick, happy Halloween. I hope you all have a fun and safe day. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I was a mess after the breakup. You know that feeling of emptiness you just can't describe? Nights were brutal. I'd sit in my tiny little house, staring at the ceiling or mindlessly scrolling through my phone, desperate to escape my thoughts. But nothing worked. Music, TV, even the booze I was drowning in. It only muffled the noise in my head for a while. One night, after finishing off another bottle of cheap whiskey, I decided to take a look on the dark web. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just something to make the emptiness stop, something to hit harder. I'd given up on caring by then. Clicking through all the shady sites, my screen occasionally had some pop up every once in a while, but one had caught my eye. Life-sized robot dolls. The hell? Was all I could think of. I've seen some terrible things on the dark web, but what came to my mind when I saw this ad was those horror stories where people would get murdered and turned into dolls and be sold on the dark web. A sane person wouldn't dare to click it, but in my half-drunken state, I was too curious. I hit the pop-up and there they were. Dozens of them laid out like some twisted shopping catalog. Blondes, brunettes, redheads, every type of woman and man. Every shape and size, all perfect in that eerie manufactured way. I didn't plan on sticking around, but my fingers betrayed me. I clicked on the redhead girl just to see. The bigger image popped up, along with details on the side. Her height, eye color, body type. She was priced at $25,000, which made me chuckle. There were things you could adjust below the purchase button. You could change her voice or personality. There were even more erotic things you could change, which wasn't surprising. I stared at the image of her. Yeah, she was realistic looking in the photo, but it was obvious she wasn't human. Her eyes, there was something empty about them. That's always the giveaway with robots. They can get everything else right, but those eyes, they're never quite alive. I clicked off the page and kept browsing. I shouldn't have, but I did. I spent a few minutes scrolling, telling myself I was just curious, but the truth? Part of me wanted one. Not to fulfill some twisted fantasy, but to fulfill the empty space in my home. To fill the hole left by my ex. I filtered the page by price, and that's when I saw her. The cheapest female model, $1,000. I clicked her image, a petite girl, black hair, brown eyes, slim frame. Nothing special compared to the others, but that didn't bother me. She didn't need to be special. I read through the details, and when it all seemed fine, I scrolled down to the purchase button. My heart was racing. I paused for a second looking at the adjustable options. I hesitated, then clicked on personality. A blank text box appeared. I guess I was supposed to type in what I wanted. I stared at the cursor, wondering what to do. For some reason I typed in protective, cute, sweet, funny. It was my ex's personality, at least the parts I liked about her. I hit enter, then moved the cursor over to the purchase button. I sat there thinking, Was I really about to do this? I knew it was stupid, but what did I have left to lose? If I got scammed, so what? Life would go on, right? With my eyes closed, I clicked purchase. I followed the instructions to pay with Bitcoin, my hands trembling the entire time. Once it was done, the screen went black. White text appeared. Purchase successful. A few days passed, and though it was a ridiculous purchase, I completely forgot about it. So when I came home from work to see a giant wooden box sitting on my steps, my heart sank. I stood there for a moment just staring at it. A part of me hoped it was a prank, but I knew better. I walked around it cautiously, my heart pounding. It wasn't labeled, no markings, nothing. I felt a swirl of emotions, but mostly fear. My mind jumped to the worst conclusions. What if someone was inside waiting to jump out and kidnap me, turn me into a doll like those horror stories? It wouldn't have been the first time someone fell for something shady online. But then again, no one would have waited for me to get home just to kill me, right? I swallowed my fear and, with shaky hands, hoisted the box up. It was heavier than I expected, and I struggled as I carried it inside. Of course, that chihuahua next door started barking. I hissed at it to shut up, kicking my door closed with the package finally inside. My nerves were shot. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case. If someone jumped out, I was going down swinging. I started to pry open the box, every sound making my heart race faster. The wood creaked as I finally got it open, and then my knife clattered to the floor. Inside the box stood the girl from the website. Same height, same hair, same everything. She looked real. No, she was real. At least, she looked that way. Her eyes were shut, head tilted down, slumped against the side of the box like she was powered off. I bent down and picked up the knife, my hands trembling. With the tip of the blade, I poked her arm. The skin moved. It actually moved, like real human skin would. I froze, fear twisting in my gut. This couldn't be synthetic, could it? I panicked. What if this was a dead woman? What if I had just spent $1,000 to smuggle a corpse? I tapped her shoulder repeatedly, my heart in my throat. Nothing. Not until her eyes flickered open, sending me stumbling back in shock. I held the knife up like a child hiding behind a blanket. She blinked a few times, her metal joints softly clicking with each blink. Her neck turned in small, precise motions, like she was calibrating herself. I watched in absolute horror as she scanned the room, then locked her gaze on me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then dimmed. Scanning complete. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice monotone as she stepped out of the box like it was no big deal. My throat tightened. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Are you real?" I stammered, barely holding it together. She let out a laugh, sounding almost human. It was unsettling. She took a step closer, but I backed away, still gripping the knife like it was my last line of defense. "Of course not. Well, I'm here physically," she said with a cheerful tone, far from the robotic voice she'd used before. "But if you're asking if I have awareness like a human, no. Now, please put down the knife and get up off the floor, hun." I hesitated, my mind spinning, but something in her voice, or maybe the fact that I was just too exhausted to fight, made me put the knife down. Slowly, I stood up, taking cautious steps closer. Her eyes followed my every move, locked on to me like a predator tracking its prey. "Prove it," I demanded, my voice shaky. "Prove you're a robot." She sighed, rolling her eyes, and then, without warning, grabbed her face and began to pull. I watched in a mix of disgust and horror as she opened her face, revealing a mess of wires and circuits beneath. Her robotic frame gleamed, reflecting my own terrified expression back at me. I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She closed her face back up with a click and smiled. Believe me now? I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I don't understand. If we have this kind of technology, robots that look and act like people, why isn't it out to the public? I muttered, more to myself than to her. She shrugged, completely unbothered. Who knows? But I was made to be your companion. That's my job. That's why you bought me. To protect you and make you feel better. Strangely, that made me smile. There was something comforting in hearing that, even if it was from a robot. I cautiously stepped closer and, for reasons I still don't fully understand, wrapped my arms around her, pulling her into a hug. Her skin was soft and warm, but beneath it, I could feel the cold, hard metal of her frame. I heard her arms raise, and she hugged me back, the embrace feeling almost human. I pulled away, still a bit uneasy. So, what do you do? I asked, trying to break the tension. She giggled, shrugging again. Whatever you want me to do. I glanced around the room and pointed at the fridge. Can you get me a whiskey? She looked at the fridge, then back at me with a nod, before walking over in a way that was almost too smooth. No robot should move like that, I thought. I half expected her to malfunction, but instead, she opened the fridge, grabbed a whiskey, and walked back, handing it to me with a smile. Here you go, she said cheerfully. I took the bottle from her, dumbfounded. Thanks. Do you have a name? She shook her head. No, you must name me. I took a sip of the whiskey, thinking, how about Maeve? Like Maeve, but with AI in the middle. Since, you know, you're AI. She tilted her head slightly, and for a moment, I felt like she was judging me, but then she lit up. I love it, Maeve exclaimed, her tone bubbly. After that, I tested her limits. I had her clean up, cook me food, even give me a massage. The more commands I gave, the more comfortable I became around her. She wasn't just some clunky robot. She held conversations, laughed at my jokes, and responded quickly like a real person. By the end of the day, I was lying on her lap, laughing at some dumb TV show as she stroked my hair. Maybe I could live with this. But then that chihuahua started barking again. It was late, 11 p.m. My neighbors always left the poor dog outside, and it barked at everything. Maeve noticed my irritation. What's wrong? I sighed, covering my ears. That dog, it's always outside barking. I wish it was gone. Maeve nodded thoughtfully. I see. The dog is causing you distress? Kind of. I muttered, lying back down. I quickly got distracted, wondering if Maeve had human anatomy as well, but I shook the thought out of my head. Weird. No way was I going to go down that path. Instead, I pulled the blanket up and settled into bed. Can you hold me? It makes me feel safe. Without hesitation, Maeve lay beside me, her limbs clinking softly as she wrapped her arms around me. It felt unnatural, cold and mechanical, but comforting enough for me to drift off. I vaguely remember telling her good night as the sound of the dog's barking faded away. The next morning I woke up with Maeve still lying next to me, her wide, unblinking eyes staring directly at me. I nearly jumped out of bed. Jesus! She laughed and I joined in, feeling slightly ridiculous. I told her to make breakfast while I headed outside to check the mail. The usual non-stop barking from the neighbor's dog had finally stopped, which, if I'm being honest, lifted my spirits a little. Maybe they had finally decided to let the poor thing inside for once. As I was flipping through the mail, the sound of a car engine roaring behind me made me turn. My heart nearly dropped when I saw who it was. My ex. She got out of the car, walking slowly toward me. "Hey, can we talk?" I straightened up, trying to shake off my slouch, and cleared my throat. "Yeah, we can talk." Just as she was about to say something, her eyes drifted past me and she froze, staring in confusion. I turned to see what had her attention. Maeve was standing by the window, hands clasped behind her back, watching us. We all locked eyes for a moment before my ex turned around, heading back to her car. "I see. You moved on. That's fine. I'm happy for you," she said, her voice colder than usual. I grabbed her arm, panicking. "No, wait, it's not like that. She's just a toy, a robot. Let's talk." But she pulled away, her face twisted in disgust. Without another word, she got in her car, flipped me off, and shouted, "Dick," out the window before speeding off. I stood there watching her car disappear down the street, then turned back to face the window. Maeve was gone. Anger boiled up as I stormed inside. "Didn't I tell you to just make breakfast? What were you watching us for?" I snapped, rubbing my temples in frustration. Maeve looked up from the stove, calm as ever. "I apologize. I didn't mean to interfere. Your ex-girlfriend seems to be making you distressed. Why don't you move on?" My anger faded, replaced with a sense of defeat. I can't. She's all I can think about." Maeve handed me the plate of food, her eyes fixed on me. "Do you wish she could be out of your life too?" I stared down at the plate, thinking for a moment. Sometimes it would be nice to not have to think about her or see her anymore. Maeve nodded, her expression unreadable. As the days passed, I kept Maeve busy with household tasks and seeking comfort from her presence. It was strange, but a relief. There was no sign of the neighbor's dog barking all day. Maeve even managed to whip up some impressive meals despite the limited food in the house. When night fell, I crawled into bed, Maeve lying next to me, her arms wrapped tightly around me, and I felt like a baby being cradled to sleep. I drifted off, relaxed and safe, but in the dead nights around 3 or 4 a.m. I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure what had stirred me, but the first thing I noticed was that Maeve wasn't beside me anymore. I got up and walked through my bedroom, then the rest of the house, calling her name. No response. With each unanswered, my confusion turned to fear. Where could she have gone? Did she malfunction? I kept searching until my eyes landed on the attic. It seemed unlikely she'd be there, but I had to check. I grabbed a stool, pulled the attic cord, and as the stairs dropped, something fell from above, hitting me square in the face. The weight knocked me backward, and whatever it was hit the floor with a thud. It was too dark to see clearly, but I felt fur and warmth seeping through my fingers. Something was leaking. Instantly disgusted, I dropped it and scrambled to turn on the nearest light. The moment the light flicked on, my body froze, knees weak as I collapsed onto the floor. My stomach turned and dizziness hit me like a wave. There, in front of me, lay Coco, the chihuahua from next door. Or rather, just its head. Its lifeless eyes were wide open, staring back at me. Its snout was twisted, the fur around the neck mangled and stained with blood, almost as if it had tried to resist before being ripped clean off its body. Blood pooled around it, some of it still clinging to my hands. I just stared, the shock overwhelming every other thought in my head. My mind flashed back to the previous day, remembering the offhand remark I'd made to Maeve. I had said it would be nice not to see her anymore. And just like that, my heart plummeted. I sprang up from where I was, snatching my phone off the nightstand, frantically dialing my ex's number. It rang and rang, but no answer, just her voicemail. Panicked, I raced out of the house, still desperately trying to reach her. Every call went unanswered as I floored it, tearing down empty streets, ignoring the speed limits. My hands were still sticky with the blood of that poor dog, now slick with my sweat. When I finally reached her house, it looked untouched from the outside. I barely stopped the car before jumping out and sprinting to her door, pounding on it. No response. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I burst inside only to be met with an overwhelming stench. The smell of death. I took a few steps into the living room and my shoes splashed in something wet. Blood. It was everywhere, covering the floor like a macabre blanket. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode, but I kept going, the dread building with every step. And then I saw her. Maeve was there, calmly gathering the remaining pieces of my ex's body. She was humming, her movements smooth and deliberate as she placed the scattered limbs into bags. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to comprehend the scene before me. Maeve turned, smiling as she held my ex's decapitated head. "Oh, hi. Sorry about the mess," she said casually. "She put up more of a fight than the dog did." I was too stunned to speak. My eyes locked on the lifeless, mutilated body of the woman I had once loved. Her eyes had been gouged out, her jaw grotesquely dislocated, and worst of all, her tongue was missing, ripped clean out. "Don't worry," Maeve added. "I have a 90% success rate of getting away with this legally. I made sure to hide and—" "Why?" I screamed, my voice cracking with rage and fear. Maeve looked at me unfazed. "Isn't this what you wanted? For her to be out of your life? To never see her again?" I collapsed beside my ex's remains, my body racked with sobs as I cradled her severed hand. No, not like this. You don't just kill people." I choked out, my words tumbling out between gasps. Why did you have to go this far?" Maeve tilted her head, her expression as calm as ever. "I apologize for the inhumane methods. She was screaming, which lowered my success rate to 40% if someone heard. I had to remove her tongue and dislocate her jaw to stop the noise. For the safety of your property, I also had to remove her arms since she fought back." I stared at her, my mind reeling with disgust and terror. "Shut down," I demanded. Maeve shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You're not a developer." "Shut down, you machine!" I screamed, trembling with fury. "Would you like to end your agreement with me? You'll be refunded. However, local authorities will—" "Turn off!" I shouted. Maeve paused for a moment, her pupils dilating before she calmly walked out the front door, leaving without another word. I collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, cradling the remnants of my ex's hand, cursing myself for letting this nightmare happen. Before I could even think of my next move, I heard a loud bang on the door, followed by shouting, "Police!" The door was kicked in, and suddenly the room was swarming with officers, their guns pointed at me. "Hands! Show me your hands!" one of them shouted. "Get on the ground now!" another demanded. I stood, raising my hands in a panic. No, it's not me, it's... But before I could finish, they tased me. I crumpled to the floor. Handcuffs were slapped onto my wrists, and they dragged me out of the house past the grisly crime scene. I was thrown into the back of a squad car, the officers glaring at me with disgust. There's a special place in hell for you, buddy, one of them muttered as he slammed the door shut. I was booked and thrown into maximum security with no evidence to prove Maeve's involvement. She had erased herself from every trace, interfering with doorbell cameras, leaving no fingerprints, no footprints. She was smart, far too smart. My lawyer advised me to plead insanity. It was that or the death penalty, so I did. My family watched from the courtroom, their faces twisted in a mix of anger and sorrow, while my ex's family grieved in silence. No one believed me. They saw me as a twisted murderer who felt anger after the breakup, and the fact I killed a dog with no reason whatsoever made it worse. I was sentenced to life in a mental facility, despite the suspicion that this murder was premeditated. I'm sane, but no one will ever see it that way. Now I sit here alone with my thoughts, wondering if I should have just let Maeve finish her sentence. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't be here at all. Is it bad? I want another one. Going to work is unfortunately something none of us can avoid, and after everything that I've been remembering the past few nights, I might just join the military to avoid it. My name is Clara, for the record, and I will never work in a mall ever again. Going into my store every day came with its challenges. Most of them didn't begin until the customers started to pour in from the food court. But this day was special. This day was way different. I went, opened and closed the gate as normal, and clocked in on the main computer. I glanced over and saw that my store manager left a note for me. Kind of odd, but not entirely unusual considering it's Phil. I had worked in that store for over a year, and he still did not understand how to schedule. I'm going out of town for the day for a company meeting. Kick butt today, and don't forget to go through and change out some of the displays. Phil. I sighed. That was his job, not mine. Another Phil-ism for the books. I said aloud to myself. I completed the rest of my daily opening duties before I moved on to the extra stuff that Phil was pushing off onto me. I went over and grabbed the clothes pole so I could take down everything I had put up previously. Reaching the pole up in the air, I tried to hook onto the hanger. Of course, it wasn't easy. It was never easy. I finally caught one and wrangled it off the post like a bear catching a salmon. I sighed again, realizing that I had nothing to hang the stuff on until I put it away. Small inconveniences make for big frustrations. I said aloud to myself again. I hated going to the back room alone. I walked into the back, singing a little song to myself like a child who's afraid of the dark. This was the dark, and I am the child. I'll still admit it. I made my way to the back corner where the rolling racks were stored, and as I placed my hand on the cold metal of the bar, I realized that the lights that were normally motion sensitive hadn't turned on yet. You've got to be kidding me. I tried to pull the rack out of its cubby quicker after the gain of this knowledge. This would happen when I'm already scared. The rack stuck onto the wheels of the many other racks in the corner, and refused to let go from its metallic friends. Forget it. I let go of the rack and hustled up the motion sensor on the light. I stood there for a moment and started to flail my arms in the air rapidly to try and get it to turn on. Nothing worked, so I had no choice but to pull my phone flashlight out to solve the problem at hand. The electrical work could wait for another day. I walked back to the back corner of the room with the flashlight neatly tucked in the front of my jeans so that I had full use of my hands. As I bent down to grab a hold of the wheels in order to detangle the metal, I heard a small settling of something behind me. Not a metallic sound, but more of a piece of wet cloth dropping to the concrete ground. An alarm set off in my head. I began singing again. That was the only thing that seemed to calm me down, but I still wouldn't look behind me to see what it was. With a clang, the pieces of metal finally came undone, and the rack finally came loose. I rolled it out of the room, specifically pointing my back towards the sound. As I led the rack back out into the storefront, I looked over to the fire exit door that led to a small courtyard outside. The door had a bright red bar across the handle to let you know the alarm will sound as soon as you walk out. That was normal. The door was closed as normal. However, there was one thing that was strange. There was no light coming through the peephole of the door. I rushed back out into the front of the store, panting from not only running, but also just from the quick shock that I had gotten. I checked the clock. It's 11 a.m. Time to open up. An hour or so went by and there still had not been a single customer in my store. Actually, there have been no customers besides the same groups of 2 or 3 elderly people fast walking around the mall corridors. The security guards and all the other workers are there as normal. I look out into the food court just to make sure. I stood in my entryway for a moment, being sure that I wasn't imagining things. It was, indeed, the same people over and over and over. 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16. That's it? I asked, after a few more minutes of standing behind the cash register, mulling that number 16 over in my head and glancing back into the doorway of the back room. I figured I should keep myself busy with the rest of the displays Phil told me to change. I picked the pole back up, put it into position, and returned to my routine. 10 minutes went by, still no customers, and I found myself leaning more into the music I had been playing than before, perhaps trying to keep my mind from thinking too much. 20 minutes went by, and as I was replacing the display at the top, I heard it. The exact thing that I was subconsciously afraid of. A voice. A small, faint voice. It sounded delighted in tone and seemed to only come out in a high-pitched squeal. This time I did turn around, my whole body twisted toward the origin of the sound, and, of course, nothing. Absolutely no one to be seen. I held my breath, then thought for a minute, and I exhaled again, thinking that maybe I was still wheezing from the cold I had prior. What do they call that? Grasping at straws. It took me a little bit to finally gain the courage to go back to the wall and continue the display. It was 3 p.m. by the time I finally decided to finish it. We closed at 7 p.m. I walked back over, pole in my hand, and began putting clothes up and taking clothes down, even getting sucked into the puzzle of shelving for a little bit. Seemingly, everything weird had stopped happening, and I could finally focus on the display. Still, no customers. I went out to the food court again. 16. Bending down, I retrieved the last shelf from the floor and put it into place, looking underneath as I lined the pegs up with the holes in the shelf. Standing back up and taking a step back by a shirt rounder, I appreciated what I had just achieved and metaphorically and physically pat myself on the back. I walked back in front of the wall and grabbed the pole from the shelf I had leaned it up on. As I reached for the pole, I felt on the back of my shirt a reach for me, a small wave of a grasp that wasn't entirely successful. I gasped without thinking, and spun around for a second time. Within this motion I heard another small voice, a laugh this time, a chuckle it seemed, too human to be what I saw in that moment. Peeking through the gap in the shirts, a young girl smiled up at me. She seemed to be around 7 years old, but with extremely aging wrinkles around the sides of her eyes and deeply dark bags beneath them. Dirt caking the teeth that were looming out from behind her dry, cracked lips. Sat in a stout crouch in the middle of the rounder, she held her arms out to me as if to give me a hug. The smell that permeated from her underarms as she raised them to me was a stench I could never forget. It still lingers in my nose. The smell of death, disease, and of matter decaying with every breath she took. tissue sloughing off her cheeks as she smiled at me. I stepped back. She smiled again, put her arms back down by her side, and ran off into the back room of my store. I called Phil. August 28th, 5:30 p.m. Phil has done nothing but laugh at me, so I'm leaving. This is the one thing I'm writing down in order to try to get everything out into the open. I'm done with the store and whatever it has to offer. I'm doing exactly what everyone in the movies doesn't do but should. He can laugh all he wants. I'm not dealing with that. I'm calling security. Sergeant Stintz came to my rescue at that moment. Stintz was a small, round, and slightly uptight older man. Many people in the mall hated him because of that, but I always chalked it up to it being because he was bald. I told him about the peephole and the weird sounds. I even told him about the girl woman and how there hadn't been more than 16 people in the food court all day, him included. I asked him to go to the other side of the mall and find out more information. I didn't know what else to do. I closed the store gate at 6:30 p.m., which gave me some time to go around to other stores and see if they experienced anything strange. Besides, of course, the lack of new customers. I walked up to all 3 restaurants in the food court, and they all gave me the same vacant smile, blank and soulless eye contact, and they all seemed to follow the same script. Thank you for coming. Have a nice day. With a closing, dirt-covered smile, before turning away, dropping the smile to an almost melancholy frown, and getting back to their tasks. I went to the store next door to my own, hoping there would be some sort of normalcy there. We had become pretty friendly due to being so close to each other. I walked into the first store, and at first I didn't see anyone at all. Not a single soul. I thought maybe they had closed their store as well. Maybe they also thought some weird stuff was going on. But everything else was normal. Music going, cash registers still logged into Catherine. No manager would leave their store like this. I walked around for a minute and noticed nothing else of substance and decided to go to the store on the other side of mine. I finally saw people again. I replayed in my head. Please be real. Please be real. Whatever that meant, I had no idea. I walked up to Megan, a longtime manager of the store. She was bent over putting away displays of lamps and their boxes. I said her name, faintly but loud enough for her to hear, to no avail. I decided to tap her on the shoulder. Megan turned around. As her body rotated towards me, I could see the beginning of what was a smile, muddy teeth careening from her face, and lips pinned back to her ears with passionate glee. The same dark wrinkles and bags that were apparent on the girl were apparent on Megan. I jumped back. Thank you for coming. Have a nice day. She turned back around and continued to do her task. As Megan, or this other form of Megan, continued back to her duty, a sharp screech came from what sounded like the back room of Megan's store. I still say, though, if it's anything like my back room, I wanted very little to do with it. I headed back there anyway. As I started sprinting towards the back of Megan's store, I could hear her putting all of the boxes down, and slowly footsteps began to follow me to the back. Excuse me, that area is for employees only. Please make your way to the exit. Anger grew in Megan's voice each time she repeated the phrase. I made my way to the back room. Unlike my back room, theirs had a door. Without looking back or even thinking twice, I slammed the door shut and pushed anything I could find in front of it. She didn't stop following me, although her actions didn't become hostile either. Only her words grew with anger. She politely knocked on the door, and after a while she stopped talking and just knocked on the door. I turned around, feeling secure in the room that I was trapped in. I walked into the room more and quickly found that there was a staircase leading up to another level of the room. A scream pierced the air again. and this time I was solidified in my answer by going up there. I made it to the top of the staircase and walked down a long, slender, and dimly lit hallway. One door was visible to me at the very end, a flicker of light blinking underneath the door as if to invite me in. Another scream was cast through the air. The door was completely shut when I walked up to it. I tried to slowly open the doorknob, but it let out a terrifying moan. I froze and looked around me, hoping no one else would be led to my area. I peered into the room after a minute or two and saw Sarah, Megan's employee, tied up to the boiler in the corner of the room. Slashes and cuts smeared across her chest. Her shirt barely hung off her shoulders due to the trauma cast upon her. She was turned away from me, her face pressed up against the wall. I whispered her name. She turned her head towards me, and as she did, there were two purple, swollen sockets where her eyes should have been. "Clara, you should not be here." She shakes her head. Somehow her eyes were still able to cry. "I'm here to help you. Hold still so I can get the ropes off." I moved closer to her, trying to get my hands on the knot of the rope. She started to squirm. "I know you're scared, Sarah. I'm sorry. I promise I'm not one of them, okay?" She stopped moving. Her head slowly moved up to look at me, still making eye contact. "One of who? Clara, what do you mean?" "I mean one of those things who hurt you, okay? I'm not going to hurt you." I reached out to untie her again. She pulled from me. "How do I know that? How do I know they didn't do that to you too?" "Sarah, please, I'm begging you. Let me get you out of here." "Don't touch me, you freak. You are one of those things that did this. You are." She started laughing now. Not a humorous laugh, more of a laugh someone expels when they've truly given up. As Sarah laughed, I began to hear footsteps down the hallway and a faint, "Thank you for coming, have a nice day," echoing into the room. I scooched back, trying to push my back up against the wall as tight as I could so maybe they wouldn't see me behind the door. There was no other place to hide. They swung the door open, luckily not closing it behind them. "Thank you for coming, have a nice day," they said as they entered the room. It was two men, one that worked at the shoe store on the other side of the mall, and the other was wearing a mask. Another "Thank you for coming, have a nice day" was expelled from the mall employee, and an uncommon "Up you go" came from the other. I let out a slight gasp when I heard this. They stood Sarah up on her feet. Her legs were barely able to hold her weight. The two men spun her around, and the masked man plunged an elbow into the middle of her back, forcing her to stand up straight. I gasped again. I watched as the masked man grabbed Sarah's face by the chin, turned her to face him, and spit in her swollen face. "That's what you get for trying to get in my way." He smacked her across the face. His spit flew off her lips as he hit her. "And that's just for being..." "Thank you for coming. Have a nice day." The mall employee, Mark, I think his name was, followed suit with spit to Sarah's face, followed by a deep smack. The smile never left his wrinkled and deformed face. "I found your stash, sweetheart. I don't know how you thought you could do this to me." "To me? Really? I mean, it's kind of biological if you think about it. Even without seeing me, you can tell that men are inherently stronger than women. It's just science, babe." He shrugged and pulled out a large butcher's knife from the waist of his pants. "I kind of feel like a real villain right now. This is one of a kind, truly. Thank you for making this possible." He grabbed Sarah's face again and made her turn towards him, this time kissing her. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too tight along her jawline. "See? I told you. I'm just stronger." With the last word leaving his lips, He plunged the knife into the top of Sarah's kneecap and sliced clockwise, nearly exposing bone. "If you really think you're so strong, prove it to me." Another laugh expelled from his chest as he completed the circle around Sarah's knee, now showing bone. I began to feel sick. My stomach turned and twisted like I was the one being cut. I felt the pain in my legs and even in my chest. It was nothing I had ever felt before. The masked man finished the job on the other leg, but that's what I gathered from Sarah's cries of horror. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. "Now, sweet, sweet Sarah, what is one thing you need from me before I leave you be?" "Who are you? And why can you talk to me when the others can't?" she asked through her sobs and pain. I still couldn't look at her. "Oh, my dear child, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you." I saw his mask be cast aside in front of the door. There was a brief pause. "I guess that didn't help you, huh?" He bursted out into laughter, just barely cut off by Sarah. "I said, who are you?" Her screams were louder now, as if she had tried to move towards him. "Well, if you insist." He shrugged. He raised the knife and slammed it down through the floorboard, assumingly pinning Sarah to it. I heard the crash of the wood and the bellowing cries of Sarah as he laughed again. "I'm surprised you can't tell by the sound of my voice. I mean, with how long we worked together. It stints, you dunce. Night-night, sweet Sarah." I started to peek back around the door when I heard another slam of something into the floorboards. Sarah's once full and wholehearted screams were now nothing more than weak whimpers. Footsteps let out. Sarah went silent, as did the room. I still didn't want to believe what I just heard. Stints? So he was looking for me now, too. Sarah. Poor Sarah. Dang it. I could have stopped him. I could have done anything. Although I wasn't quite sure if she was worth giving my life for. What am I saying? This is sick. I left the room and made my way back down the stairs and into the original back room. I see that this store also had a fire exit in the back. I let myself out. Unlike our store, this back door led to a small corridor that connected the different major parts of the building, not outside. Why couldn't it have led outside? The lights were incredibly dim, a pale yellow. The walls were a grimy eggshell color, and the floors were concrete. My footsteps echoed as I made my way through, unsure to where this corridor would lead me. I saw a large double metal door at the end of the hall. The crack between the door, dark, however. No light could be seen. As I made my way towards the double doors, I began to smell a sweet but sour smell coming from the door left of the double doors. It should have been what led to one of the few restaurants within the food court. It said so on the door. I turned, suddenly losing my objective out of pure curiosity. The same thing that killed the cat. I grabbed the handle to the door, took a deep breath and pulled. The smell wafted towards me as I opened the door. It was truly petrifying, as the smell of what could only be described as rotten flesh hit me in the face. 2 restaurant workers were laid out, still in front of me. A dirty smile creeped across their faces as my eyes glanced over them, dissipating as I closed the door. I turned away, not truly capturing what happened, and made my way towards the double doors once more, the smell of rot still in my nose. With everything that had happened so far, I had no idea how to even process what was happening at this point. I pushed through the second set of doors, instinctively putting on the ear-to-ear grin, wiping it off, then putting it back on. What was I doing? This was probably how everyone in there became one of those things. I know this now and can even justify it as trying to blend in. There was no one there. I looked both ways and noticed, still no one there. I saw the exit. The one thing that I could actually focus on. I checked left and right one more time. No one, and made a break for it. I reached the doors. "Where do you think you're headed, lady?" I listened, but didn't let him influence my decision. I was getting out of there. I grabbed the door handle and got into the passageway before actually stepping outside. I went to grab the other door handle. "I asked you, where are you going?" He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and raised me into the air. He turned to make me face him and spit in my face, much like he did Sarah. He was going to kill me. He took me back inside the mall, this time locking the exit doors, and threw me over the counter of a food court restaurant, landing me upon the two previously executed workers. I searched around me for anything that I could possibly find to stop him. I thought about what he had said to Sarah, and how I couldn't be the one to prove him right. I tried to stumble to my feet as I felt a gaze on the back of my head. I managed to get my knees before looking up, and met the eyeline of not just Mark and Stintz, but the girl woman, Megan, and the 4 other food court employees I had seen prior in the day. All looked at me from over the counter. Their wrinkled and decrepit fingers snuck over the edge of the table, their fingernails chipped and shattered away as they gripped the wood. Stintz came from around the corner, through the side doors, and knelt beside me. "Do you understand what's going on here yet?" He tapped the same knife he used to kill Sarah on the tile next to me. "We here want to run a smooth and tight-knit community of hard-working employees, Miss Clara. And you, Sarah, and a few others, as you can see." He took the knife and poked at the bodies below me as if it were a dead animal. "Don't really fit the bill. They, however, are perfect for the gig." He gestured behind me to the gaggle of degenerates that were caressing the counter. "You do have to understand that we must let go of you now, right? No hard feelings." He chuckled and looked at me deep in my eyes. I should have gotten up and ran right then, but it was almost like he had me in a trance of some sort. After what felt like hours, I finally gained the courage to stand and run. I dashed past Stintz through the side doors of the restaurant, feeling a sharp pain on my scalp as I got slightly past him. I was face to face with him again, with a fistful of my hair being the only thing giving him power over me. Before I knew it, I began to cry. I didn't want to show him my weakness, nor did I want him to have any power over me than he already did, but it couldn't be stopped. There, sweet Clara, no need to cry. It is just a job after all. No need to fret." He wiped a tear from my face and lifted my chin to look at him. "Smile for me, will you?" he said, soft and arguably sincere. I did. "Thank you," he said. I closed my eyes as I smiled at him, feeling the tears start to dissipate. An electric ache shot through the side of my face as I sat with my eyes closed. I couldn't place exactly where the pain was coming from, but I knew then that wouldn't be the end of the pain. Another twinge of pain shot up from my hands, left then right. I was dropped to the ground again. A cacophony of "thank you for coming, have a nice day" erupted as I grasped the cold tile beneath me. Feeling blood rush from my palms, it all went black. I woke up, felt my legs being grasped and dragged as my head bounced off the concrete ground. I looked around to see myself within the back rooms of the mall. I looked up to see who was in control of me, and I couldn't make out who it was in front of me. Maybe due to my eyesight still being blurry from the pain, or due to the multitude of concussions I'd gained through my journey on the ground. "Hello?" I managed to say. Without looking at me, the voice replied, shaky yet strong. "Are you okay, Clara? I don't know what is happening here, but I'm really glad I decided to come in." It was Phil. "I appreciate your help, but I can walk," I said. feeling his hands let go of my ankles. Sorry. I didn't know how else to do that. As I stood to my feet, Phil grabbed my hand and dragged me out of the emergency exit. It led to the same courtyard our exit led into. Phil still didn't let go. Instead, he dragged me to his car, parked in the farthest corner from the mall, and shoved me in through the passenger side door. "We're going to the hospital," he said. It all went black again. I woke up again, this time in a hospital room. I heard the beeps and buzzes from around me and saw the wires attached to every limb. No one here but Phil. "What did you tell them?" I asked, afraid of him telling them the truth, but just as terrified of him not saying anything at all. "A car accident," he replied. "I told them I found you on the side of the road on my way home from work, and here we are." I sighed, as did he. My dinner came. I've been awake now for about 3 days, and I can't get the sight of my palms or the pain I felt out of my head. The smiles and sounds I had been tormented with the whole time will now be infecting my every move forever. I hate thinking about the fact that they're there while I'm writing this today. It all started with a single pimple on my left cheek, large enough to notice, small enough to disregard. I ignored it and continued brushing my teeth. I made sure to wash my face very thoroughly and went down to my car to drive to school. But as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that made me pause. There was another pimple, slightly smaller, nestled right next to the first one. It honestly freaked me out a bit. I was pretty sure that wasn't there before, but I reassured myself that there was no way a pimple could grow that fast. I must have just missed it in the bathroom. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, the pimples had multiplied into a little cluster, about a dozen little orbs of pus stuck to my face. I decided then and there that something was wrong. I skipped first period and went straight to the nurse's office. They just came out of nowhere. I know it may seem very sudden, but acne is a completely normal thing for kids your age. This isn't necessarily a typical case of acne, but it's not immediately concerning. I would recommend improving your personal hygiene routine, and if the problem doesn't go away, you should set up an appointment with a dermatologist. She dug around in her cabinet for a moment. "Here," she said, handing me a large band-aid. "You can cover it up with this." As I walked to class, I removed the band-aid from its wrapper and carefully stuck it over the cluster of zits. I felt a swell of embarrassment. I probably looked ridiculous. I worried people would stare at me and laugh. When I opened the door to Mr. Whitler's history class, everyone fell silent and turned towards me. I was half right. People were staring, but nobody was laughing. I felt my face flush red with embarrassment. My throat burned, and I bit back tears. I quickly looked down and hurried off to my desk. I pulled my hood over my head and my head on my desk. It was a solid 20 seconds before anyone spoke. Mr. Whitler nervously cleared his throat. As I was saying, the Native Americans alleged that the United States had violated their treaty by allowing settlers past. Most of my classmates' attention had turned back to Mr. Whitler, but I could feel a couple gazes straggle on me. I already knew that the reaction I got wasn't just because of a silly-looking band-aid, but that didn't stop my heart from sinking into my stomach as I snuck a peek at my face in the warped reflection of the metallic table leg. The entire left side of my face was covered in clusters of angry red zits. From the bottom of my jaw to just above my eyebrow, my skin was entirely composed of pimples, none of them more than 1/10 of an inch apart. I looked like a mutated, deformed monster from some old movie. I started to feel lightheaded. I waited for class to end. It felt like forever. I didn't look at my reflection for the rest of my class because I worried that if I did, I would burst out into tears and draw even more attention to myself. When the bell rang, I pushed past everyone else and quickly walked to my car, keeping my head down the entire time. I knew that by the time I got to the car, I would see that my face had gotten much worse. But when I got onto the jet black asphalt of the parking lot, I realized how much worse it was without even seeing my reflection. You know how, when you close one of your eyes, you can see your nose at the edge of your vision, and it looks out of focus and blurry, and it obscures your vision a bit? My vision was obscured by tiny blurry dots around my eyes, like specks of dirt around the frames of your glasses. I reached up to my face and felt the area around my eyes, and sure enough, there were zits. One protruding out from my upper left eyelid, another nestled into the corner of my right eye. In fact, now that I was paying attention, I realized that when I blinked I couldn't close my right eye all the way. I drove straight home. It was one of those drives that seems to last forever. It was like when I was a little kid getting sent home from school early for misbehaving, and I would sit in the back seat waiting for my mom or dad to chew me out in uncomfortable silence. Except this time, I was all alone. After I pulled the car into the driveway, I turned off the engine. I Googled and called around and started trying to set up a dermatologist appointment as soon as I possibly could. Eventually, I found a doctor that could see me the next morning at 5 a.m. After I set it up, I just sat in the car for a few minutes thinking, God, what will I tell Mom and Dad when they get home? What will they think of me? Maybe this was a silly thing for me to think. They were my parents. Of course they would support me and try to help, but I guess part of me didn't want to see them look at me with the same look of disgust everyone else had. It was around 1 when I got out of the car. I realized that I hadn't eaten all day, so I went to the kitchen and started making myself a peanut butter sandwich. I didn't have the energy to make anything else, and as I sat down and took a bite, I felt a sharp pain in my mouth. I rushed over to the bathroom to take a look in the mirror. The zits had spread from my left cheek past the center of my face, and were starting to invade the right side, but that wasn't the cause of the pain. Pimples had begun to grow on my lips, not just around my mouth area, but on my lips, in my mouth. It seemed like they were made of the same sensitive skin as lips, and were raw looking, almost swollen. One of the ones on the inside of my mouth seemed to have popped. I think it grew a little too tall, and when I went to take a bite of the sandwich, I must have bitten down on the pimple. I wiped the pus off the inside of my lip, wincing in pain a bit. I went back to my sandwich, taking special care to keep my lips far out of the path of my teeth. Slowly chewed through the bread until I was left with one final piece. But as I scarfed it down, a little piece of the bread got caught up in my throat. Made sense. I was so afraid of biting my lip, I must not have chewed it up properly. It wasn't big enough to choke me. It just went down the wrong pipe. I went to the bathroom sink to try and cough it up, but it wouldn't budge. I tried hacking it up or washing it down with water, but nothing seemed to work. In fact, it felt like it was getting worse. It was getting harder to breathe and I was starting to panic. Eventually I decided to shove a finger down my throat to try and make myself gag it up, but the moment my finger brushed up against a smooth lump of skin lodged just within my reach, I realized what was really happening. The zits were starting to grow on the inside of my throat, and they were big, and getting even bigger. As I felt around the inside of my throat, I realized that there were more. Lots more. Gagging, I pulled my finger from my throat, retching and coughing. I tried to catch my breath, but I couldn't get enough air. I was being strangled from the inside, and it wouldn't be long before I couldn't breathe at all. I started crying in fear. I didn't know what to do. I was dying. I had one last reckless hope in the back of my mind. A knife. I need a knife. I threw open the bathroom door and ran to the kitchen. I frantically rummaged in the drawer before my fingers curled around the handle of a small knife. I tried to breathe out, but I found I couldn't. The pimples had grown into my nostrils, blocking off all air entirely. My throat was blocked off too. I sprinted back to the bathroom, clutching the knife. I hastily stood myself in front of the mirror and opened my mouth as wide as I could. So wide it hurt. I saw the wall of flesh that formed at the back of my throat. As my head started to spin, I reached the knife into my mouth and started cutting. The blade punctured the wall of pimples like a tomato. The pimples burst immediately, gushing pus into my throat. The pain was immense and unbearable. I instinctively recoiled and tried to pull the knife from my mouth, but I cut a deep wound into the roof of my mouth. But I wasn't done yet. I had to keep cutting. I sliced deeper, cutting away the zits, crowding the walls of my throat, indiscriminately annihilating everything in my path. I choked and cried and screamed against the vile soup of blood and pus and saliva gathering in my gullet. I started to pass out as I felt the blade stab through my Adam's apple, but the last thing I remember is that I just kept cutting. I woke up in the hospital a few days later. Miraculously, I had survived. Mom had come home early and found me bleeding out on the bathroom floor and had immediately rushed me to the hospital. I've stayed in that hospital for 3 months now. The doctors have no explanation for what has happened to me. The best explanation they have is that it must be some sort of genetic defect. They say that it's probably not actually acne, that it instead might be some bizarre form of cancer. They've tried everything to fix it. They thoroughly scrub my face multiple times a day, which usually hurts. They've tried injecting me with all sorts of drugs, but none of them work. I can't stand it when my family and friends come to visit. I don't like seeing them cringe in horror at my condition. I haven't been able to speak since cutting into my throat, and sometimes that makes me feel relieved. Yesterday they told me that the growths in the back of my throat are starting to reform. They said that they didn't feel that it was safe to surgically remove them, due to the damage my throat has already sustained. So tomorrow morning, they're going to put in a breathing tube. I don't know what I'm going to do. I was born in Sunset Bay, Florida, or at least I thought I was born there. I thought I was raised there, spent 17 and a half years of my life there, went to school there, had my first kiss there, and almost lost my virginity there. But now I can't even be sure. You see, as far as the world seems to be concerned, there is no such place as Sunset Bay, Florida. And there never was. Unfortunately, this story began with Hurricane Milton. As we're all aware by now, Milton was utterly devastating for many fellow Floridians this month. And let me just say that my heart goes out to them all, well and truly. Luckily for me, though, I'd moved out of Florida with my family in 1995, just a few months before I turned 18, and I now reside in British Columbia, here in Canada. Understandably, though, when I heard that Milton made landfall in Florida, I was concerned for my hometown. I'd never been incredibly attached to Sunset Bay, and frankly, it had been years since I'd even thought of the place. I have 2 sons and a wife, and there are more important things in my life than reminiscing about my formative years down south. However, when I learned Milton had made a pass around near Big Cypress down by Okeechobee, that got my blood pumping something fierce. You see, Sunset Bay is, or was, or maybe never was, only a handful of miles away. Naturally, I hopped on my computer when I got the chance and did some researching. I looked up Hurricane Milton Sunset Bay. At first, I was relieved to find I'd come up with 0 results. I figured that meant there hadn't been anything newsworthy there. which could have been good news in and of itself. But I was soon struck by the realization that I wasn't seeing any news about Sunset Bay, because the search engine had taken the liberty of assuming I was talking about Sunset Beach down in Treasure Island. So I tried rephrasing: Hurricane Milton, Sunset Bay, Florida, Okeechobee. But nothing. All I got was a handful of irrelevant pages on Sunset Beach, Siesta Key, and even Tampa. I was hit each time with a prompt asking me something like, "Did you mean Hurricane Milton, Sunset Beach?" I found myself, like a real old man, sitting there while verbally beginning to chew out the computer. "No," I would say. "No, not Sunset Beach, Sunset Bay." I found myself getting so fed up with what I took to be some sort of Abbott and Costello style mix-up that I ended up trying to soothe my seething self by simply typing in Sunset Bay, with the hope that that'd get me somewhere. But to my shock and severe annoyance, I found myself yet again redirected to Sunset Beach. For context, Sunset Beach is a whole 5 or so hours from where Sunset Bay should be. They are not the same place in any sense of the word. I found myself seething even further, typing in Sunset Bay into my search bar with every sort of permutation I could think of. Sunset Bay, Florida, Sunset Bay, Florida, Florida, Sunset Bay, United States, Sunset Bay, Okeechobee, Florida, United States, but never got a single result. By then I was livid, but I was also determined to beat the computer, as dumb as that sounds, to get the results I was looking for. Call me stupid, call me stubborn, call the endeavor pointless. I simply wanted it to work once, but it never did. Not even once. Not even a hint of acknowledgement that Sunset Bay ever existed. Not even Google Maps would acknowledge its existence. Believe me, I tried. Eventually it got to the point where I figured that the only way to get this thing working would be to stop looking up Sunset Bay itself and instead look up some specific place in Sunset Bay that may have some sort of website. Maybe online reviews, maybe a blog post. Something. Anything. So I took a pause, rolled back from the desk, furrowed my brow, and got to thinking. I tried to think of where the most significant, internet-worthy place from back home might be, but the moment the neurons began firing off in my mind, I was struck with a pain so intense I can hardly even describe it. I'd imagine it felt like how it would feel if your skull was cleaved apart with an axe, and then boiling pitch was poured into the gaping wound. I screamed my lungs out, grabbed my head with both hands, and came careening down onto the floor, gasping and panting like a drowning man. The world felt like it was going out of focus, but my ear on the ground, I could hear the dull footsteps of my eldest son running into the room, followed shortly by my wife. As they hoisted me onto my feet as best they could, they asked me what was wrong and why I had shouted, and I could only respond by telling them it was probably nothing, just a bad headache. Even so, my wife, who has some sort of sick addiction to these medical channels on YouTube, made me promise to see a doctor because she told me there was something called thunderclap headaches, and they could be a sign of something really dangerous. Before you ask, no, I haven't gone yet, but I'm booked in for next week with my GP. To my relief, it seemed as though as soon as the subject was changed and my mind drifted from the vague memories of my hometown, I felt good as new again, as though nothing had even happened. I gave my family reassurance as best as I could, gave my wife a quick kiss and my son a hug, and placed myself firmly back in my chair. I was back in the saddle, and I hadn't been bested yet. Piece of crap, I murmured as I slapped the keyboard, looking up to see my wife, hand outstretched with some Tylenol for me, to whom I quickly clarified that the computer was the piece of crap, not her. She gave me a quick, understanding chuckle and left, leaving me alone once again with my new arch nemesis, the computer. However, it only took me a few more failed searches to get utterly fed up, and to hell with it. Later, I was storming out of the room, throwing in the metaphorical towel. I had better things to do with my time, or so I thought, because that night as I lay in bed I found myself grumbling, huffing and puffing to myself like a candy-deprived child about the whole debacle. However, the more I ran over the whole situation in my mind, the more my frustration began to morph into unease, and the more thoughts like, why the hell couldn't I find anything about Sunset Bay? To, why couldn't I find anything about Sunset Bay? Surely it's an abnormal occurrence for a town with a public school, thousands of residents, and several notable businesses to simply disappear not just from the map, but from the veritable neo-library of Alexandria that is the internet, right? I couldn't take it anymore. My annoyance had morphed into an overwhelming sense of dread, and I found myself in desperate need of some assurance that this was all some huge mistake. So I went digging, not through the computer this time, but through an old wicker cabinet by the edge of the bed full of keepsakes and memories. After a few moments of searching, I found what I was looking for. My middle school yearbook from Sunset Bay Public School. An incredibly creative name, trust me, I know. To not wake my wife, I slipped away with the book back into my office, cracked it open across the desk like some sort of ancient scroll, and found my dread quickly turning to terror. There I was. My page was bookmarked, and to my right should have been Brock Tanner, but I found my greasy, pimple-pocked face next to a pale gray square, and below, where the name should have been, was an amorphous black smudge like the ink that had been nearly rubbed out with a cloth. A misprint, maybe. I thought so, but I became less and less certain the more laminated pages I turned, finding myself faced with an ocean of gray squares and black smudges, swirling into a blobby mess like a horrifying Rorschach test, occasionally broken up by a calm, unbothered young face on whom the horror of this whole ordeal was understandably lost. Eyes glued to the page, I found myself fumbling for the landline, dialing the school's phone number, as if from muscle memory, from all those days playing hooky as a kid. It never even crossed my mind that even if this was all some huge misunderstanding, they'd certainly be closed in the dead of night. But the phone rang. It rang, and then it rang again, but a little softer, and softer still. The quivering sounds of the line grew faint and distant, quieter still, as though the phone were being dropped down a bottomless pit, falling away until it was entirely indistinct. I nearly screamed in surprise when breaking up the dead silence. A robotic voice boomed, crackling and monotone, telling me the call was unable to be completed as dialed, before booting me out, leaving me right back where I started, eyes wild, panting in distress, fists clenched on the arms of my chair. Mackenzie, Mackenzie, I stammered to myself in a fervor now, glancing down at the face of Mackenzie Connors, one of the few remaining human buoys in the ocean of nothingness, which glared back at me from the page. I went right to the computer, booted it up, and typed in Mackenzie Connors, Sunset Bay, Florida. And to my surprise and delighted relief, I was able to find what seemed to be her LinkedIn page, which, while having no visible mention of Sunset Bay, did mention that she was from Florida, and she looked to be about the right build and age to be her. Once again, I failed to consider that it was the middle of the night, and may very well be wherever Mackenzie was now. But I needed this. I needed to hear someone's voice, someone from back home. I didn't even have an excuse for calling. The best I could think of was maybe something about the oddity of the yearbook, but the line connected before I could think of anything better. Hudson Tech Solutions, Mackenzie speaking. How may I help you? Hey, Mackenzie? I asked, the awkwardness of this whole situation beginning to dawn on me. Yes, how may I help you, sir? I apologize if I've got the wrong person, but did you happen to go to school in Sunset Bay, Florida? Excuse me? Did I heard her begin before my ears were utterly assaulted by a horrifying, high-pitched scream from the phone speaker. So shrill and intense I worried it would tear the thing to bits, along with the grating sound of shattering glass. Mackenzie? I tried to remain calm, my head beginning to throb through the dullness of the painkillers. Mackenzie, are you okay? No reply. I sat wide-eyed in horror as the line seemed to briefly go dead before I could hear the sound of quiet, murmuring voices and approaching footsteps as I assume people began to barge into her room. Hey, Mackenzie, are you alright? One voice asked. Did someone scream? Another timidly inquired. She's on the ground! She's on the ground! A woman shrieked. Let go of the phone! Let go of the... Another implored feverishly before the line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence with the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I was mortified. I couldn't do anything but set the phone down on the table, not even the receiver, and shuffle, milky-eyed, back to the bedroom, whereupon I slid under the covers and shuffled up to my wife. As though by wrapping my arms around her, I was trying to confirm to myself that I did exist and things did make sense. I wish I had more to tell you, but as of now, this is where I'm at. I sincerely hope someone can help me here because I have not, for the life of me, been able to find any external references to my hometown. And every time I try and think real hard about it, it feels like my head is going to explode. Or implode, or shatter into a million pieces. Can someone please help me? I will never tell my parents how my grandparents really died. They wouldn't believe me if I did. You may not either. About a month ago, I had just gotten out of class when I checked my phone. To my surprise, I had a voicemail from my father. Sure, Mom has called me from time to time since I left for college, but when I saw that my father had called me, I knew it had to be bad news. I just didn't know how bad. Son, we're buying you a plane ticket. We need you to fly home. There has been an accident. Call me when you get this. That's all the voicemail said. I called them and he explained that my grandfather had been killed in an accident with his combine while harvesting corn, and that the shock of finding him had given my grandmother a heart attack. The flight was nerve-wracking. I have never done well with small spaces, and I couldn't smoke on the flight, which made it even worse. I spent the whole flight fidgeting and walking back and forth to the restroom, even though I didn't need to go. I just needed to move around. My dad was already waiting for me when I landed, which ruined my plan of sneaking a cigarette before he showed. He gave me a hug and helped me load my bag in the car. I decided I needed a cigarette bad enough and lit one up in the parking garage. My dad had never seen me smoke, and I tried to act as casually as I could. He raised an eyebrow at me as he closed the trunk. I waited for a lecture or an outburst, but all he did was nod. That's a nice lighter, he said. I hadn't realized I was still fidgeting with it. I handed him the vintage trench lighter. Ellen, my girlfriend, bought it for me a few weeks ago. Found it at an antique store in Seattle. He took it in his hand and looked it over approvingly. Then he handed it back. No smoking in the car. Your mother would never let us hear the end of it, he instructed. My headache was gone now that I had sufficient amount of nicotine. I threw the cigarette down and stomped it out with my foot. An hour later, we were back at my parents' house. My mother greeted me with a hug, then she stepped back and looked me up and down. "Your father used to smoke menthols too when he was your age," she said and gave my father a smirk. I wasn't sure if I was embarrassed she had caught me or surprised my dad used to smoke. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked into the house. We spent the night catching up on what I had been up to while I was in college. They filled me in on how their business was struggling, but they were keeping their heads above water. And then eventually my father filled me in on the details of the funeral. They had decided to do a closed casket on both of my grandparents. The injuries that my grandfather had received apparently were too gruesome to an open casket. And they did a closed casket on my grandmother's so that people would ask why. The next morning we attended the funeral. There were only a few people. My grandparents were in their 80s and had very few friends that were still around. Afterwards, we went back to my parents' house and ate. "Son, your mom and I have talked about this. We need to sell your grandparents' farm. We have neither the time or money for the upkeep. If you can take a week off school and clean the place up, get it ready to sell, we will give you 25% of whatever we get when it sells," my father explained. I took a large bite of chicken and chewed it as I thought it over. I could call the school and explain the situation, and I could easily catch up later. "Yeah, I can do that, but what do you mean clean it up? How bad is it?" I asked. My father and mother exchanged a worried look before she looked back down at her plate. "Just before your grandfather passed, your grandmother called me. She told me that he had been diagnosed with dementia. Between that and their diminishing health, I suspect that the property is in pretty bad shape." "You haven't been out there?" I asked. It wasn't more than a couple of hours away. I couldn't believe they hadn't been to visit. My mother replied in a defensive tone. "We have both been working 7 days a week at the shop. We had to let all of our employees go. Business is not going too well." I nodded and asked what the plan was. "I will drive you out tomorrow. You can stay there until I pick you up Friday. That gives you 6 days to get things boxed up. I already ordered the boxes. They will be delivered tomorrow." Following day, my father drove me up to the old farm. I spent a few weeks there as a kid. The place always had a creepy vibe, but it was fun. I could walk through the corn all day and never reach the end. As we pulled in, there was a large scarecrow that stood over the corn at the edge of the field. "When did they get that thing?" I asked. My dad didn't answer. Instead, he looked at it out of the corner of his eye. His face contorted into a look of intense worry, maybe fear. I couldn't tell. As we passed the scarecrow, I looked back. The wind hit it just right, and for a second I could have sworn it turned its head to watch us. About 25 minutes after I had been dropped off, I was still wandering through the house, evaluating the countless knickknacks and pictures, trying to decide what should be kept, sold, or tossed. The phone rang. My heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since I had heard a landline ring. I thought it might be the fire alarm. I answered it. "This is Jim. I am delivering the boxes you ordered, but my GPS doesn't work out here. Can you give me directions?" the man asked. "Head down Old Country Road about 5 miles. Make a right at the dirt road," I said. I tried to think of a landmark, knowing how vague that was. "You'll see a scarecrow. Make a right at the scarecrow." The man thanked me and hung up. About a half hour later, I was washing the dishes in the sink and cleaning up the kitchen. My grandfather must have just set out for lunch before the accident because there were 2 plates of food on the table. It was so rotten I couldn't tell what it was anymore. The pungent smell of mold and rotten food was making me gag, so I had to open the kitchen window. I listened to the wind chimes on the porch and found it rather relaxing. I began to wonder how many summer days my grandparents had sat out on the porch, sipped sweet tea, and listened to the wind. Over the wind chimes, I heard a scream from the field. I shut off the water and leaned closer. I heard the scream again, almost as if someone was howling in pain. I rushed outside and stood at the edge of the corn. My grandfather had waited too long to harvest his crop. The sun had bleached the corn until it was now the color of bone. The stalks waved back and forth in the wind. The dry leaves rustled against each other as they swayed. I heard the noise again and began to walk out into the field toward the noise. "Hello?" I yelled. I passed row after row of maize, looking left and right in the 8 inches of space between rows. And then, in the distance, I saw a figure move. I began to run after it. I caught glimpses of the figure every few seconds as the wind allowed. After a while, I lost sight of it. I ran faster and faster trying to catch up with whoever it was, and then I ran full speed into the scarecrow. The straw filling did little to dull the impact with the wood post it was mounted to. I fell back onto my back. I grabbed my nose and could feel the palm of my hand immediately filled with warm blood. I sat up and felt dizzy. My head throbbed with each beat of my heart. When I was finally able to stand up, I looked up at the scarecrow. It was probably 7 feet tall and then another 2 feet off the ground. It was dressed in blue overalls and a red flannel. The head was a burlap bag with thick red string stitched into a jagged mouth, and big black buttons sewn on for eyes. Then it was topped with a straw hat, stitched on with the same red string used for the mouth. This thing was intimidating to me at 6'2". Those crows must be terrified of it, I thought to myself. I pinched my nose to stop the bleeding and began to look around. I saw this scarecrow when we pulled in. There was no way I made it to the road already. I tried to hop up to see over the corn. I couldn't see anything but more corn all the way to the horizon, and when my feet landed, my head felt like it was going to pop. Thick blood began to flow more quickly from my nose. I pinched my nose and held my head back, facing the sky to slow the bleeding. Out of the corner of my eye, that's when I saw it. The scarecrow had turned to face me. I turned to face the oversized doll and figured that it must have been the wind again. For a second, we made eye contact. The big button eyes seemed to be looking right at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was the wind that moved the head. It was just a bag filled with straw. It was the wind that was blowing the stalks, and I imagined it was a figure running. It had even been the wind that was howling as it passed through the leaves. But still, as I stared at it, I knew it was staring back. The hair on my arms began to raise, making my arms tingle. My heart began to quicken, and then the scarecrow abruptly lifted its head back up and stared out over the field. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I stole short glances over my shoulder as I pushed through the corn. All I could see was a path of broken corn stalks behind me. Soon I heard a rumbling noise ahead of me. A truck, I thought. I kept pushing on. My lungs began to burn with the effort. My foot caught in a shallow irrigation ditch and sent me tumbling onto the dirt driveway. The driver of the truck locked up his brakes and skid past me, missing me by inches. I laid there in the dust for a moment. The driver got out of his truck. "What is wrong with you?" he asked. His tone was harsh and angry. I stood up to face him. He was in his mid-40s with a big beard and an even bigger beer belly. "I'm sorry. I lost my footing," I said. I looked back into the field expecting to see the monster coming out any second. The man followed my gaze into the field and then looked back at me. "You high, boy?" he asked seriously. I stopped myself. Telling him I was being chased by a scarecrow would only reinforce his accusation. "I hit my head pretty hard," I said, placing my hand back on my nose. He nodded and then offered to give me a ride back up to the house. "I would have been here earlier if you knew how to give directions. There wasn't no scarecrow at the road," he said. We pulled up to the house and began unloading the boxes he came to deliver. I'll be back Friday to pick them up once they're full. Your dad booked a storage shed on the other side of town. You have about 200 square feet, so keep that in mind as you pack. The man said. He stared into the field. My daddy has a cornfield in the next county. He didn't do half as well as they did here. Actually, now that I think about it, I drove past this place last year. I remember they had a rough crop last year. Do you know what they did differently this year? The driver asked. No, I'm sorry. I don't have any idea, I answered. He nodded and spit. Well, take care of yourself. I'll see you on Friday. With that, he left. I went inside and grabbed a clean shirt. I washed the blood off my face and hands in the bathroom and changed. I tried to shake off the incident with the scarecrow. I must be more stressed out with the loss of my grandparents than I realized. I needed a distraction and began to pack up the office downstairs. I was putting papers in a trash bag when I came across a letter my grandmother had written. Son, I need some help with your father. The dementia is getting worse. The last 2 days he has been raving like a lunatic. This spring a man came by and offered us a scarecrow as a gift. He said it did wonders for his crop and wanted to pay it forward. Your father told him no at first, thinking the man was a swindler, but he insisted he didn't want anything in return. Anyway, your father is now convinced that the scarecrow is the reason we had such a great crop this year, but the scarecrow won't let him harvest it. I have left you several voicemails about this, and you haven't called me back, so I thought I would write you. Please help. I am worried about your father. Mom. I put the letter down and sat in the office chair. I could dismiss my experience with the scarecrow as stress, or an overactive imagination, but my grandfather having similar worries about the same scarecrow? What are the odds? I thought to myself. I needed a cigarette. I went outside to the porch and lit one. I took a long drag and then exhaled. A cool breeze blew by, bringing the wind chimes to life. I turned around to look at them and see if one would be worth keeping. That's when I saw it. The scarecrow was now just 20 feet into the field. It hung on its post, staring at me. While I was trying to process this, it fell down. More like hopped down. Immediately the post went up and then disappeared into the field. It can't be alive, I thought to myself. Seconds later, the scarecrow came out of the corn. It began running across the lawn, carrying the 10-foot post like a Trojan soldier, running with a spear. The scarecrow launched the post. It sailed across the yard and missed me by a foot. It took down the wind chimes and impaled the wall behind me. I turned to run inside, but the post was now blocking my entrance. I hopped the rail on the porch and ran toward the old barn. I could hear the scarecrow running behind me, gaining on me, the straw rustling under his overalls and flannel. Once I was inside the barn, I tried to close the door, but it was stuck open from years of neglect. I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a pitchfork. The scarecrow entered the room. Its jagged mouth and button eyes now seemed much more menacing as it marched toward me. I rammed the pitchfork into its chest as hard as I could. It pierced deep down into its body easily, but it seemed to have no effect. With its left hand, or burlap mitten really, it grabbed my arm. The thing was impossibly strong. It used its right hand to pull the pitchfork out, and then turn it toward me. I struggled uselessly against its grip. I desperately searched my pockets for something I could use as a weapon. I took my lighter out and flipped the top open. The flame caught almost instantly. In seconds, the scarecrow was fully engulfed. It let me go and fled into the field. The field was burned in less than an hour. The fire department said it was overly dry because it wasn't harvested on time. They didn't have any interest in investigating the matter further. My father saw the post stuck in the wall when he picked me up. I knew he recognized it as the scarecrow's post because he Didn't ask any questions about how it got thrown through the wall or how the field burned down. I know on some level he suspects that the scarecrow killed his parents. I know on some level that he is grateful I killed it, but I know we will never discuss it because people would think we were crazy. People can be so stupid, Carl said, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone. The kids were upstairs and we were just starting to unwind. What that meant was we were fooling around on our phones in the dimly lit living room. The worn leather couch creaked as I shifted, hoping the children were finally asleep. It had been a long day, filled with the usual chaos of raising 3 kids in a small house. Carl, my husband of 12 years, continued, his face etched with the familiar lines of stress that had become more pronounced in recent months. My cousin copied this post to his Facebook feed. Don't forget tomorrow starts the new Facebook rule where they can use your photos. I do not give Facebook or any entities associated with Facebook permission to use my photos, information, messages. People really think this works. They believe copying and pasting this text will somehow opt them out of a TOS. I glanced at Carl, noting how he lived for getting upset at what he saw as his family members' gullibility. The most baffling thing is who originally makes these and what do they get out of it? He asked, really on a tear now. Do you remember chain letters? I replied, not understanding why he even still visited Facebook. All I could figure was that he got a dopamine hit from getting irritated. You know, send a copy of this to 10 people you know, or else something bad is going to happen to you. I think someone just gets a kick out of making people do things and wasting their time. They want to see how far they can get the letter to travel, or how many people they can get to participate. Carl nodded, considering my words. I think we're being too logical about this, he said after a moment. Is it possible that some people think they have the power to bestow luck onto another person? Maybe it's kind of like Ringu, right? Do they think they have the psychic powers of Sadako? I couldn't help but smile. Trust Carl to direct the conversation to his favorite subject, J-horror. Make a copy of the tape within 7 days. Pass it on to someone else and breaks the curse. At least for you, I said, reciting the plot to a movie he made me watch countless times. Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by a piercing scream. Carl bolted upright, his phone clattering to the hardwood floor. What was that? He barked, his eyes wide with alarm. I don't know, I said, my heart racing. I thought they were going to bed. Carl stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. I can't stand this. They always do this kind of stuff. This has to stop tonight. Carl is usually calm, but sometimes things rub him the wrong way and his temper flares. Tonight was one of those times. As he stormed up the carpeted stairs, each step a thunderous stomp, I couldn't help but remember the gentle man I'd fallen in love with, the man who would spend hours playing make-believe with the kids, his laughter echoing through the house. That man seemed to be appearing less and less these days. Perhaps it was his 60-hour-a-week job. Maybe he spent too much time looking at social media. Whatever the cause, this last month is the most stressed I'd ever seen him. I followed him up to the kids' room, my mind racing. We live in a modest 2-bedroom house. Its walls adorned with family photos and children's artwork. Our 3 kids share one room, which often makes bedtime a challenge. The oldest, Charlotte, is 12. Abby is our middle child at 10, and our youngest is Connor at 8 years old. At the top of the stairs, Carl took a sharp right, his shoulder brushing against the pale yellow wall we hadn't been able to repaint in years. He violently yanked open the door, slamming it into the wall with a resounding thud. A framed picture of the kids at the beach rattled precariously, a memento from our last family vacation 3 years ago. The scene inside the room was surreal. The three children sat in a circle on the plush blue carpet, illuminated by the soft glow of an astronaut-shaped nightlight. Charlotte had her back to us, her shoulders hunched. Connor's face was pale, his freckles standing out starkly against his skin. He looked deathly afraid, his eyes wide, darting between his sisters and us. "You're supposed to be asleep. What are you three doing?" Carl shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls covered in glow-in-the-dark star stickers. Connor pointed a trembling finger in the direction of Charlotte. Abby jinxed her," he stammered. "They said the same thing at the same time." "No, she can't talk until somebody says her name," said Abby calmly, as she turned to face us. Whatever had Connor on edge didn't seem to affect her. There was something unsettling about Abby's composure, a glint in her eye that I'd never noticed before. I didn't think Carl could look any angrier until that moment. His face turned a deep shade of red, as if it were possible for steam to expel from his ears. It would be happening. I could see the vein in his temple throbbing, a sure sign that he was about to explode. "I wish you would just do what I ask," Carl barked, his voice rising. "We told you three to go to bed, and you're up here playing games." Charlotte laid her head in her hands, her curls falling forward to hide her face. Connor looked even more frightened than before, but it wasn't because of Carl's shouting. Those two didn't seem to notice his rant. Abby lowered her head, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her pajama top. She was the only one who appeared to be listening. "I am so tired of repeating myself over and over. You are the worst kids ever. Now please, do what I say, just this once." I watched Abby carefully, and noticed her lips move slightly, barely audibly, mouthing those last three words along with Carl. He did say that phrase to the kids quite often. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how much our family dynamics had changed. When had our home become filled with so much tension and anger? Abby then looked Carl right in the eyes, her gaze unnervingly steady for a child her age. She softly retorted, "Jinx." Carl's hands flew to his mouth, his eyes growing wide with shock and confusion. He turned to me, his gaze pleading. Slowly he lowered his hands to reveal smooth, unbroken skin where his mouth should have been. At the same time, Charlotte turned around, and I gasped as I saw that she too was missing her mouth. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Every child knows the Jinx game, the silly rule that if you say the same thing at the same time, you can't speak until someone says your name. But this was different. This was impossible. As the reality of the situation sank in, a mixture of emotions washed over me. Fear, seeing my husband and daughter's faces smooth, where their mouths should be. Confusion, as my mind struggled to rationalize what couldn't be real. And strangely, a hint of relief. The only thing I knew for certain was that none of us were in a hurry to say Carl's name. I was walking to my car as quickly as I could. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 p.m. I shook my head. My phone rang. The screen showed that it was my wife calling. Right on time. "You better be close to the restaurant," she said. The tone in her voice left me wondering if she knew that I was just leaving the office. I stayed silent. "Jack," she said quietly, "I'm already here." "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much work I would have to get done today, and we're still not on pace to make our deadline. The whole team is working late, not just me, and I can't be the only person leaving on time when my subordinates are staying late," I pleaded. "How long until you get here?" she asked angrily. If I run every red light, I can be there in 30 minutes, I told her. She didn't answer for a long while. I got into my car, and just as I started to wonder if she had hung up on me, my car picked up the Bluetooth. Okay, just hurry. It's bad enough the waiter has asked me twice if I was waiting for someone, she instructed. I'm sorry, babe. I'll be there as soon as I can, I said. I shifted my car into reverse and started to back up. A loud bang on my window made me slam on the brakes. I threw it into park and turned around to see if I hit something or worse, someone. I didn't see anything. I turned back around in my seat to find two children standing next to my door. I jumped at the shock. They both just stood there. Judging by their size, I would guess they were about 9 or 10. I had this terrible feeling in my stomach that there was something wrong. But they were children, probably lost, I told myself. I cracked the window just enough to ask if I could help them. Can I use your phone? One of the kids asked. The child's tone had a tinge of darkness to it. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, but I reached for my phone and unlocked it. When I looked back up at the child, I noticed they had both moved closer. They both stared down at their feet. Their hoods up over their head cast shadows over their faces. It almost appeared they didn't have any faces at all. At this point, I had this unyielding sense of fear building that I couldn't justify. Is there someone you'd like me to call for you? I asked. Then one of the kids raised his head slightly. The shadows that covered his face parted as the new angle of his hood allowed me to see his face. But his eyes were still hidden in the shadows. They appeared to be pitch black. Not that they were missing, but he had no iris, no whites in his eyes at all. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and the boy seemed to notice my fear. He lowered his head again. We need to use your phone, he pleaded. I recovered and scolded myself quietly for allowing a trick of the light to scare me so badly. Who can I call for you? Just give me their number, I said, my hand ready to dial. Maybe it was the fact that the kids wouldn't look at me. Perhaps it was the fact that the kids were out of place in the business district after sundown. But something inside me was screaming not to give them my phone. If you can't give me the number, I'm sure you can go inside the lobby and ask the security guard to let you call your parents, I said and pointed toward the lobby door. Neither of them turned to look. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I put my car in reverse. I was eager to get out of there. I was eager to get away from these children. I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure I was clear. A loud bang stopped me in my tracks. For a split second, I thought I hit someone, and then I heard it again. Both of the boys were slapping their hands, palm down, on my driver's side window. A third time, a fourth time. In unison, they slapped my window. Can we just get in your car? We need a ride, they asked in a monotone and utterly unsettling tone. I slammed the gas down and backed up without even looking, and then I slammed into drive and peeled out. I was a good 10 minutes down the road before my heart stopped trying to beat out of my chest. I was so worked up that I almost missed my exit. I wanted to get home so bad. I had forgotten about date night. I met my wife at her favorite restaurant and we ate. She was initially angry about me being late. We hadn't had much time alone since we had our son. He was 4 now, and this was probably our 5th date night in that 4 years. Her mood switched from being angry to laughing at me as I explained why I was so late. I told her everything about the kids. So you were scared of a couple kids? They could still be out there looking for their parents. She heckled me. She knew how scared I was. There was something wrong with them, but she didn't believe it. At least, not at that point. Our son was staying at the babysitter's house all night, so we had the house to ourselves. It was 3 in the morning when we heard the knock at the door. I woke up first and just sat in bed and listened. There was a faint, steady knock at the door. In threes. Knock, knock, knock. And then a pause followed by another set of 3. Knock, knock, knock. Then my wife woke up. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Yeah, there's someone at the front door," I replied. My heart sped up. I knew before I did that it was them. My wife sat up and grabbed her phone. "It's after 3 in the morning. Who could it be?" she asked. "And they didn't hit the doorbell," she added. She opened the doorbell app on her phone to reveal an empty porch. There was nobody there. She showed me. The knocking continued, and then I saw them. There was a faint silhouette in the darkness. "Zoom in there," I said, and pointed to the corner of the steps. She did, and we could see them. The 2 boys were standing in the shadows. One of them kicked the steps. Knock, knock, knock. My wife looked at me. "There is no way those kids followed you home. This has to be a joke," she said. She stood up and put on her robe. I did too. We both made our way downstairs. We argued as we walked. She wanted to open the door. I didn't. Knock, knock, knock. "We can't open the door," I told her. "They're just kids playing a prank," she replied. Knock, knock, knock. Finally, we reached the door and my wife undid the locks and swung it open. We both took a step back as soon as we did. The kids were no longer standing in the shadow but had moved up to the first step. The only light was from behind us, flowing out of the house. It was enough for us to see the 2 small figures staring at us, but not enough to see any detail. "What do you want?" my wife asked. I was flipping the light switch on and off for the porch light. It wouldn't come on, but I knew it had been on when we got home. "Can we come inside?" the kids asked in unison. I could see that my wife had gone pale. She finally believed me. Something wasn't right. The kids both took a step to the next step. "Can we call the police for you? Are you lost?" she asked them. They stepped up to the porch, and then they were close enough, just 3 feet away. Their faces were fully illuminated. The light revealed the same thing I thought I had seen earlier. Wide eyes, black as coal. They began to smile at us. "We need to come inside. We need help," they said in unison as if they shared the same thoughts. I moved my wife out of the way and slammed the door. My hands fumbled for the locks as I looked through the peephole. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled through the door. My wife still had her phone in her hand. She started to dial 911. "Wait," I said. "They're leaving," I told her. The kids walked back into the street and disappeared into the night. The next day we slept in and then picked up our son. It was a pretty uneventful day, at least until 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of knocking. I sat up, half asleep. I heard my wife tell me it was just our son. "I'll get it," she told me. I went back to sleep. That was about 10 minutes ago. I noticed she didn't come back to bed, and I decided to check the security cameras on my phone. My wife is lying on the floor dead. There's blood everywhere. Standing at her feet are the 2 boys, and next to them is my son. His eyes were black as coal. As I'm writing this, I can hear them walking down the hall toward me. For the love of God, if you see black-eyed children, do not talk to them. Do not give them anything, and please, do not let them into your house.